Imagine yourself in a dark, damp and cold place. A pit, a place where you were thrown by those who were supposed to protect you. That was the beginning of Joseph's story, a young dreamer, son of Jacob, who had every reason to give up. But, as you'll see, the pit wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of an incredible journey. Joseph was different. From a young age, he carried something special inside him. While his brothers tended the sheep, he dreamed. And these weren't ordinary dreams. They were visions that seemed too big for a simple shepherd. One day, he shared one of these dreams with his family. He dreamed that they were all in the field, gathering bundles of wheat, when suddenly his bundle stood up straight, while his brothers' bundles bowed down to his. Imagine the scene. A young man, his father's favorite son, telling a dream where he was exalted and his brothers bowed before him. For Joseph, it was just a dream. For his brothers, it was like a stab in the back. Envy began to sprout in their hearts. Who does he think he is? They must have thought. Why does he always have to be the special one? But Joseph's dreams didn't stop there. He had another one. This time, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. When he told this dream even to his father Jacob, even he, who loved Joseph deeply, rebuked his son. What does this dream mean? Will I, your mother, and your brothers actually bow down to you? Joseph didn't tell these dreams to exalt himself. He was young, maybe naive, and didn't realize how his words could hurt. But the seed of envy was already planted in his brothers' hearts. They couldn't stand to see the colorful tunic that his father had given Joseph, a symbol of his favoritism. Now, with these dreams, their anger only increased. One day, while they were tending the sheep far from home, Joseph's brothers saw the perfect opportunity to get rid of him. "Hey, here comes the dreamer," they said to each other sarcastically. They planned to kill him, but Reuben, the oldest, convinced them to just throw him into a dry well. After all, he was still their brother. And that's how Joseph, the beloved son, the dreamer, was betrayed by his own flesh and blood. They threw him into the pit, and while he cried out for help, they sat down to eat, as if nothing had happened. But the story didn't end there. A group of merchants passed by, and Judah had the idea to sell Joseph as a slave. 20 pieces of silver. That was the price they sold their own brother for. Joseph, who hours before was dreaming of the sun, the moon, and the stars, was now being taken to Egypt as a slave, alone, scared, betrayed. But even in that situation, he didn't know that this was just the first step of an incredible journey. Because Joseph's dreams weren't just his, they were part of a much bigger plan. What about you? Have you ever felt misunderstood? Have you ever shared a dream and been ridiculed or rejected? Joseph's story shows us that sometimes the dreams that God places in our hearts can seem too big, even for those around us. But don't give up. Because as we'll see, the pit isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Have you ever felt wronged, betrayed, abandoned by those you trusted? Joseph deeply understands what that's like. He who was Jacob's beloved son was ripped from his family, sold as merchandise by his own brothers, and taken to Egypt, a distant, strange, and hostile place where everything he knew, his language, his culture, his home, was left behind. But Joseph didn't allow the pain and injustice to define him. Even in slavery, he maintained his integrity. He didn't let himself be corrupted by hate or self-pity. Instead, he worked with dedication, honor, and faithfulness. His strong character caught the attention of Potiphar, a high-ranking officer of the Pharaoh. Potiphar trusted Joseph so much that he put him in charge of his entire household and possessions. Joseph, even in a situation of servitude, prospered because God was with him. However, life rarely follows a linear path, does it? Just when it seemed that Joseph had found some stability, he was tested again. Potiphar's wife, attracted by Joseph's good looks and character, tried to seduce him. But Joseph, faithful to God and his master, resisted. He knew that giving in to temptation would mean betraying not only Potiphar, but also the principles that guided his life. His resistance, however, came at a high price. Humiliated by the rejection, Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of attempted assault. Without the right to defend himself, Joseph was thrown into prison, once again a victim of an injustice he didn't deserve. And now imagine the loneliness he must have felt. Far from home, betrayed by his brothers, falsely accused, and locked in a dark cell. But even there, in that desperate situation, Joseph didn't lose hope. He continued to trust in God, keeping his faith and his integrity intact. This scene makes us reflect. How often, when faced with the injustices of life, are we tempted to abandon our values? How often does pain lead us to question whether it's worth being faithful, honest, and upright? Joseph's story reminds us that even when everything seems lost, faithfulness and trust in God have a greater purpose. What about you? What would you do in Joseph's place? How would you deal with the injustices and temptations that come your way? Joseph's life challenges us to look inside ourselves and find the strength to stand firm, even when the world around us seems to be crumbling. Because in the end, true freedom isn't in the circumstances, but in how we choose to live in the face of them. Prison, a place of darkness, loneliness, and despair. Once again, Joseph found himself at rock bottom, far from everything he knew and loved. After being unjustly accused by Potiphar's wife, he was thrown into the dungeons of Egypt, where hope seemed like a distant mirage. However, even amidst the chains and darkness, Joseph didn't allow the flame of hope to be extinguished in his heart. He knew that no matter how difficult his situation was, God was in control. In prison, Joseph didn't let himself be defeated. He used his ability to interpret dreams, a gift that God had given him, to help those around him. Two of Pharaoh's servants, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, ended up in the same prison as Joseph. Both had disturbing dreams and were confused, not knowing what they meant. Joseph, with his unwavering faith and his connection to God, interpreted their dreams. For the cupbearer, he predicted his restoration to his position in the palace. For the baker, a tragic sentence. Time proved Joseph right. The cupbearer was released and restored to his position, while the baker faced the fate that Joseph had predicted. Before leaving, the cupbearer, full of gratitude, promised Joseph that he would remember him and speak to Pharaoh about his situation. Joseph placed a spark of hope in him, believing that finally his liberation was near. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The cupbearer, amidst the rush of his restored life, forgot about Joseph. The promise of help was left behind like a faded dream. Joseph remained in prison, day after day, year after year, feeling the weight of forgetfulness and abandonment. Have you ever felt forgotten? Have you ever found yourself waiting for something that never happened, or for someone who promised to be by your side but disappeared when you needed them most? Joseph understands that pain. He knows the anguish of being left behind, of feeling that the world moved on while you remained stuck in the same place. However, Joseph didn't allow despair to consume him. He maintained his unwavering faith, knowing that even when men fail, God never fails. He believed that there was a bigger plan, a purpose that had not yet been revealed. While he waited, Joseph continued to be faithful, to serve others, and to trust in God's timing. And as we'll see, Joseph's story was far from over. The hope he held in his heart was not in vain. God was working behind the scenes, preparing something so grand that Joseph couldn't even imagine. Prison was just a chapter, not the end of the story. Joseph teaches us that even in the darkest moments, when we feel forgotten and abandoned, we can trust that God is in control. His timing is perfect, and his plans are bigger than any difficulty we face. Hope, when placed in God, is never in vain. And then, after years of waiting, of struggle, and of unwavering faith, came the day that would forever change Joseph's destiny. Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler in Egypt, had a dream that deeply disturbed him. In his mind, he saw 7 gaunt cows devouring 7 fat and healthy cows, and 7 withered ears of wheat consuming 7 full and ripe ears. The dream was vivid, but its meaning was a mystery. Pharaoh summoned all the wise men, magicians, and advisors of the kingdom, but no one was able to decipher the enigma. Pharaoh's anguish grew as he felt that the dream carried a crucial message for the future of Egypt. It was then that the chief cupbearer, that same servant whom Joseph had helped in prison, finally remembered him. He approached Pharaoh and told him about the young Hebrew who had accurately interpreted his dream years ago. Pharaoh, desperate for answers, ordered Joseph to be brought to his presence immediately. Joseph, still wearing the simple clothes of a prisoner, was rushed to the palace. After washing and dressing appropriately, he presented himself before Pharaoh. With humility and wisdom, Joseph made it clear that it was not he, but God, who would give the correct interpretation of the dream. He listened attentively to Pharaoh's account and, inspired by God, revealed the meaning. The 7 years of fat cows and full ears represented 7 years of abundance in Egypt, while the 7 years of gaunt cows and withered ears symbolized 7 years of devastating famine that would follow. But Joseph didn't stop there. He not only interpreted the dream, but also proposed a strategic plan to save Egypt from the approaching crisis. He suggested that Pharaoh appoint a wise administrator to oversee the collection and storage of grain during the years of abundance, creating reserves that would sustain the people during the years of scarcity. Pharaoh, impressed with Joseph's wisdom and clarity, recognized that the Spirit of God was with him. In a moment that seemed straight out of a fairy tale, Joseph was elevated from prisoner to governor. Pharaoh appointed him as the second most powerful man in Egypt, placing him in command of the entire kingdom. He received a signet ring, fine robes, and a gold chain, symbols of his new position. Joseph was placed in charge of the food storage plan, and his administration was so efficient that Egypt not only survived the famine, but also became the center of aid for neighboring nations. However, Joseph's story wasn't just about political ascent or material success. It was a story of redemption and forgiveness. When the famine struck Canaan, Joseph's brothers, who had betrayed him years before, went to Egypt in search of food. They didn't recognize Joseph, now a powerful man dressed as an Egyptian, but he recognized them immediately. Joseph found himself faced with a choice: to avenge himself on those who had sold him into slavery, or to extend grace to them. After testing his brother's character and seeing the repentance in their hearts, Joseph revealed his identity. In an emotional and tearful moment, he forgave them, saying, "It was not you who sent me here, but God. He sent me ahead of you to preserve your lives and ensure that you would survive this great famine." Joseph understood that everything that had happened, the betrayal, the slavery, the prison, and finally the ascension, was part of a bigger plan. God had used every pain, every tear, and every moment of waiting to fulfill a purpose that saved not only Joseph, but his entire family and many other people. Joseph's story in the palace is a powerful testament to how God transforms suffering into redemption. Joseph, who had been thrown into the pit and forgotten in prison, became an instrument of salvation for entire nations. And by forgiving his brothers, he showed that true greatness is not in power or wealth, but in the ability to see the hand of God in all things and to extend grace to those who have hurt us. Joseph teaches us that even when we don't understand God's ways, we can trust that He is working for our good and for the good of those around us. His story is a reminder that forgiveness and faith can transform even the most desperate situations into opportunities for redemption and hope. The story of Joseph, narrated in the book of Genesis, is one of the richest and most inspiring accounts in the Bible. It offers us a deep reflection on faith, resilience, forgiveness, and the divine purpose in the midst of adversity. But ultimately, What is the lesson we can draw from this remarkable journey? Joseph was a young man full of dreams, loved by his father Jacob, but envied by his brothers. He was betrayed, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and forgotten in prison. In each of these stages, it seemed that the world was collapsing on him. However, even in the darkest moments, when everything indicated that he was at rock bottom, God was working silently behind the scenes. Each betrayal that Joseph suffered, each difficulty he faced, and each moment of waiting he experienced were not in vain. They were part of a bigger plan, a plan that Joseph couldn't see at the time, but that was being carefully woven by God. When Joseph finally became governor of Egypt, he could look back and understand that all the trials he faced were necessary to save not only his family, but an entire nation from famine. Joseph's lesson is clear. God transforms what was meant for our harm into something good when we trust in him. Joseph teaches us that even when we are in the pit of despair, in the prison of difficult circumstances, or in the desert of waiting, we can maintain faith, integrity, and perseverance. He never abandoned his principles, even when he could have avenged himself on his brothers or given in to discouragement. What about you? Where are you today? Are you in the pit of loneliness, rejection, or sadness? Are you in the prison of circumstances that seem to have no way out? Or are you in the desert of waiting where everything seems stagnant and meaningless? Whatever your moment, remember, the story isn't over yet. Just like Joseph, you may be closer to the palace than you think. The palace isn't necessarily a place of material wealth or power, but a place of fulfillment, purpose, and peace that God has prepared for you. Joseph's journey shows us that God never abandons us, even when we don't understand his plans. He is always working, even when we can't see it. Therefore, keep the faith, continue walking with integrity, and don't give up. The best is yet to come. Joseph's story is an invitation to trust in the God who transforms pits into palaces, betrayals into triumphs, and broken dreams into eternal purposes. And you? Are you ready to trust and move forward? If you're watching this video, it's because something in Joseph's story touched your heart. Maybe you're going through a difficult time, facing challenges that seem insurmountable, or feeling like you're at rock bottom with no way out. Whatever your situation, I want you to know one thing: don't give up. Joseph's story isn't just an ancient biblical account. It's a living, powerful message for all of us today. Joseph faced betrayals, injustices, loneliness, and moments of deep pain. He was thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, falsely accused, and forgotten in prison. But in each of these situations, God was with him, working behind the scenes to fulfill a greater purpose. And the same God who transformed Joseph's life is by your side today. He can transform any situation, no matter how difficult it seems. Therefore, I want to invite you to do 3 things. 1, don't give up on your faith. Even if you don't understand what's happening, trust that God has a plan for your life. Joseph couldn't see the future, but he maintained his integrity and his trust in God, and you can do the same. 2, share this message of hope. If this video touched your heart, imagine what it can do for someone who needs a word of encouragement. Share it with a friend, a family member, or someone you know who is going through a difficult time. Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that God never abandons us, and that message may be the light someone needs today. 3, leave in the comments which part of Joseph's story inspires you the most. Was it his ability to forgive the brothers who betrayed him, his perseverance in the face of injustice, or the way he trusted in God's plan, even without understanding it? Your answer can inspire others who are watching this video. Let's create a community of support where we can learn from each other and strengthen our faith together. Remember, your pit may just be the beginning of your journey to the palace. What seems like the end may actually be the turning point that God is preparing for you. Joseph went from the pit to the palace, and his story didn't end until he saw God's purpose fulfilled. So take a deep breath, lift your head, and keep walking. God is in control, and He is working for the good of those who love Him. Your story is still being written, and the best is yet to come. Let's learn together to trust in God's plan, even when we don't understand. Leave in the comments how Joseph's story impacted you and which part motivates you the most to keep moving forward. And don't forget, the palace may be closer than you think. Now it's up to you. What are you going to do with this message? Let's spread hope and faith together. From the pit to the palace, Joseph's journey teaches us that God never abandons us. Keep the faith.